thank you for joining us here today on the Yasmine Mohammed podcast. And thank you to Elica for being here, my special guest today. I'm sure you all know Elica Le Bon. She's very popular on Instagram and Twitter and everywhere. She was recently on Rolling Stone magazine speaking about a rapper in Iran who has unfortunately been put on death row for the crime of speaking up against the Islamic regime. We're going to get into all of those details soon. Elica, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me. It's so good to be here. You're, obviously have become an icon yourself. So it's great to connect like this.
Yeah, I mean, we connected before and that was fantastic, but I didn't really get to hear a lot about your life. We talk about like the issues that are going on today, obviously, very important to both of us. But I want to talk about you a little bit, about your personal life. Tell me about growing up in the UK. You grew up in the UK and you're now living in LA, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how connected were you to your Iranian identity when you were growing up? Did you ever live in Iran?
No, so I mean, I grew up in the UK, and it's interesting because, just before getting into that, the work that we do is so unpersonal. It's always about a cause or something important that's happening in the world, or that's just so much bigger than us. So it's really it's so weird to know people so well and know nothing about them. Like we follow each other all the time and we know so much about the other people's opinions and what they think, but also at a fundamental level, it's kind of like, but who are you? We never get into that. So I think it's a good opportunity to talk about that. So I grew up in London. My mum's side of the family left after the revolution in Iran, which was in 1979. My dad was already in London. He was doing his PhD at Oxford. So at the time that the revolution hit in 1979, he had a scholarship to study there. And when the regime came in, they cut off his scholarship. So he had to drop out of Oxford and basically just like work at a bar because he had no qualifications and he couldn't go back to Iran. At the same time, my mom and my mom's family, they were in Iran. And when the revolution came in, everything just got very bad and they started just mass executing people. So many of my family members were executed. My mom was in Evin prison at one point. Her and her sister, my aunt, was in Evin prison. She was pregnant with my cousin at the time. And, she doesn't tell us too much because I think this is a trauma that's very difficult for my family to speak on. So we always kind of like, we get it, but they won't tell us too much. My mom said that she was blindfolded and she said she didn't see things, but I don't know if that's because she doesn't want to say what she saw. But so my aunt was pregnant with my cousin at the time and they had her husband in there too. And mind you, these are young kids. These are like 19, 20-year-olds, So, I mean, it was everything that you think, the torture, the this and that. They let my aunt go when it was time for her to give birth and they executed my uncle. Yeah, they lynched him. And there were all the horrible, horrible stories like before that happened, like the psychological torture. Like if you shoot your friend, we'll let you go. And then the people would do that and they'd still kill them just to torture them, So anyway, long story short, my mom ends up coming to London, meets my dad, they get married, and then she's able to bring her family through once they seek asylum there. And then my aunt and my cousin came and lived with us, and then we grew up in a house together. So I tell you all of that to basically give this answer to your question of how connected I am to that.
Yeah.
It was a part of the dysfunction and trauma that we grew up with
because it was born. Yeah.
Exactly. There's the epigenetic element of, and I remember my mom saying to me that when she was pregnant with me, she had so many problems. She was so stressed. But I remember she was saying to me at that time, she was like working on getting my aunt's visa to come to London, who her husband had just been executed. And I remember her saying to me that when she was in the hospital, when she was pregnant with me, she was like, I just was so stressed all the time. Like all I had in my body was stress because of this. And it's like, I feel like I was born with it.
Yeah, you were. Oh my gosh. Um, so if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you just briefly about this because I know it's really difficult to talk about it. But one of the things that, you know, I think has become important for people to understand about the Iranian regime today is how they allied with the left, they allied with the socialists and the communists. And then when you spoke about how they were mass executing people and how your family were in prison, et cetera, is it because they were on the left? Is it because they had, were they
No.
part of it? No. Okay.
No, the left were on the side of the regime. So
Yeah.
what happened was that there was this,
Initially, yeah. And
yes,
then
I
the
mean
regime
it's
turned on them. Yeah.
yes, it's not that the regime, it's not necessarily that the regime turned on them, it's that they were lying the whole time. Like from the beginning they were
Correct.
lying. It was just
Yes.
a
Yeah.
mask, you know?
Yeah.
So what happened is that in the universities at that time, they started developing this kind of like Marxist ideology, like Islamo-Marxist type of ideology, which was also linked to, I'm sure you know, like Yasser Arafat, and certain
Yeah.
PLO members that were kind of part of the 1979 coup that occurred. So at that time, that kind of theory, that kind of really radical left-wing Marxist Islamist kind of theory started burgeoning in the universities, and people, I mean, honestly, this is why I say it looks a lot like what's happening here in the US right now, right? And people just had this spirit of revolution and let's just like get rid of our government and do something different. And mind you, a lot of people, like people had mixed feelings about the Shah, the last king of Iran, but there was notable documented improvements that had happened for so many years that the revolution at that point, it really just wasn't justified. It was a spirit in that. It was a spirit of indoctrination. And so once that happened, they brought in the regime. No, my family were never part of that. There are many people whose families were part of that and later regretted it, right? And they were just like, okay, we made a mistake. They pulled the wool over our eyes. Like that was what it was. But I think what people don't understand is that millions and millions and millions of people did not want that. But there weren't counter protests. They were just at home like, oh my God, what's happening? We don't want this. That was my family. They didn't want the revolution. So it's hard to know exactly what it was. What I know, for example, like when I talk about my uncle who's executed, the story that I hear is that essentially, because it was really bad in the early years, you couldn't have any materials that were against the regime. You couldn't have any books, any pamphlets, anything like that. And so my uncle, who had borrowed my mum's car, he had some type of materials that were against the regime, and they broke into his car and they found it, and that was literally it.
Yeah, that's all it takes. Yeah, I remember somebody telling me before that when they came up with the hijab laws, there was a woman that was working, this guy that told me, a woman that was working with his mom commented something along the lines of like, I can't believe we have to wear this shit on our heads now. And then that's it. She never came back to work again. She just disappeared. Somebody at work told on her that she'd said that. This was in the early days when they were just trying to, well, not trying to, when they were cracking down so viciously. I mean, it's not even fair to say that because they haven't actually stopped cracking down on people viciously. But people in Iran have just, I think, reached the point where your rage overrides your fear and they're just fearless in the streets against the regime. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that, you know, in the first 10 years of the regime, I think it was notably the most vile and brutal. Like in the first 10 years, those years that this was happening to our family, I remember that, and I looked this up, you can look this up. When you go into Evin prison, which is the notorious prison,
Yeah.
at the entrance of the prison, they would line the entrance with a rows of hanged bodies,
Oh,
so that you know that this is what you're going into, and that's like it was considered the prison of no return. You don't get out of there. The fact that my mum, I remember she said something to me that was like, somebody, the Basiji or Revolutionary Guard, whatever, said something to her like, you're the first person not to make it out of here alive at that time, but it was something in that vein. But even her story, you know, she her cousin actually was on the run from them, and she came to her house to seek refuge. And then after she left, they came to my mom's house and they took her, and they basically they imprisoned her. And then once word got around that she was imprisoned because of her cousin ended up actually turning herself in, which was miraculous, because you have to have so much guts to do that. So she turned herself in, and they let my mum go, and they lynched her cousin.
oh God. I mean, that's just generational trauma that you were born with in your bones, because your mom would have been dealing with all of this as she was pregnant with you. And then as she was trying to raise you too, did she raise you? I mean, how did you? Okay, this is what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
As a mom who had been through all of that, I would probably raise my daughters to be really quiet. Do you know what I mean? Like I would just be so petrified. But instead, she ends up with this amazing woman with like the Iranian blood of the, you know, the ancestors that you're just like so many other Iranian women before you.
Yeah.
Fearless and strong and brave and outspoken. That must terrify your family.
No, they love it. They love it.
Oh, good.
I know. So what's interesting about transgenerational trauma, and I learned this in therapy, is that it doesn't get the people that live through it, because it's so much that they can never actually tap into it. They kind of just stay in survival. I mean, I know it's different for you because you made a choice, but it has to be a choice, because it's too much to actually tap into, that it can just make you insane if you don't have that kind of like higher level of consciousness, right? That you actually want to go through it and work with it. As you do, for example. But my parents' generation, that's not the type of generation that's like, you know, working through their issues. So what happens often with transgenerational trauma like that is that they stay in survival and kind of in denial. And the next generation, so me and my sister and my cousins, we're all born with this intense level of trauma that's just like in our blood, you know? And so I think that kind of explains why everything is so personal to me, because it's like I'm carrying that experience and that pain that they can't carry. You know, it's carried through me because I'm the generation that's the first generation to carry it. And so that's why everything is so personal, and that's why everything is such a trigger, because it's triggering things that exist in my bodies. It's not coming from a heady space, you know?
It's true, but then also you can think of it this way. You are a privileged young woman being raised in the West. You're a criminal rights attorney, or defense attorney. You're successful in your career. You're in a free country. You had to also make the choice to get involved in this movement and to put yourself out there to, you know, was it the woman life freedom movement that encouraged you, that made you feel like, you know what, I have to speak up. I can't keep quiet.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, growing up in London, it wasn't always like this for me. It was like, it was tough because we grew up poor. We grew up poor because of the regime. And I think people don't really understand, you know, they sometimes, when they think of the brutality of these types of regimes, they just see it as like, okay, you get killed or you don't. They don't see kind of like the downstream effects of, okay, so now we had to move to this different country and start again. And my dad, who was supposed to be somebody, had to drop out and we didn't have any money. So I'm growing up in a home that's like very dysfunctional because everyone's angry, right? Everyone's angry and shouting and toxic and abusive. And we're poor. And I think what happens through that experience, it can go several ways for people, but for me, it actually made me very resilient. When you are in an environment every single day that is so dysfunctional, you have to build resiliency. And so I think all of those things tie together, that when it came the time for me to speak out, which didn't just begin during the Woman Life Freedom Revolution. I was speaking out, doing activism for more than 10 years. It's just that it became focused in this direction around that time. It was a combination of like, I've built resiliency my entire life. I have this kind of thing in my gut that's like a relic of my ancestors' trauma, and it just merged into something that was just like a monster, where it's like, this is something that I have to do.
Yeah, you almost feel compelled to do it against your will, almost.
Yeah.
So how has this activism affected your life? Like, how has it affected your career as a criminal defense lawyer, or your family, if you have any family left in Iran, or any negative repercussions? Because I know you've had to deal with some really vicious rumors. Lots of people have been posting all sorts of comments under my advertisement for this. How are you dealing with all of that? I mean, I'm glad to hear that you're really resilient, because you need resilience for this kind of work. But tell me about that.
I mean, it's so crazy the way that people will literally just come up with anything, like anything. I remember going into this, and I used to think to myself, like, every Iranian activist that tries to do this, they get taken down because the regime does this character assassination against them, right? They send out their bots to make up rumors, and then people like run with it, and they're like, oh, this is probably true. I remember going into this with such naivety, like, this can't happen to me because I'm literally the squeaky cleanest person of all time. Like, there's nothing anyone can ever find on me. So I'm just going to go out there with all my confidence, not realizing that people can literally make up lies and people will believe it. And that's the toughest part. It's not that people are going to make up lies. Of course, people are going to make up lies. It's the fact that people believe it. That was such a shock to me. Like, really, you don't have any evidence for this claim. There's no reason for you to think this. It's such an outrageous claim. Like, the things that people come up with, like, she's a spy for Mossad. She's a spy for the regime. How can I be a spy for Mossad and the regime? I'm a Zionist Muslim spy for Mossad. That's a Jewish Israeli spy for the regime. I actually have had people. This is good. I've had people.
No, I know, because I'm the same.
No, yeah, of course.
I'm like, we should hang out. We're both
we're both being paid by the same people, right? I had a person make up a quote by me where they put my name and my picture to prove that I was actually a Jewish person born in Israel. And it was such an elaborate quote. It was like, I still remember growing up in the streets of Tel Aviv and smelling the fresh smell of falafel, and like, just an elaborate quote. And I was like, who are these? Like, how can you be so obsessed with delegitimizing me that you just literally invent anything? So it's been one thing just having to deal with that on this level, like dealing with like the craziest like exaggerations and lies and attacks and all of that stuff. But then at the other level, yes, they try to go after my family in Iran. And that's the thing. That's the type of anger that makes it. That's the thing that every day I wake up questioning, like, when people are so reckless and irresponsible to try and get your family in Iran exposed, to try and expose them to being executed by making up lies and rumors and saying their names and where they live and what they do, right? I don't think anyone can see that and not just feel just immense levels of just anger and frustration, and just like that these are the most immoral people in the world. You don't know what this is like. You don't know the risks that are involved for people like me and our families. You have no responsibility. You have no integrity. You have no morality. For you, this is just a fun game. Like, let's make up some rumors and spread them online just for fun and see what happens. These are people's lives that you're putting at risk. So the reality is that the type of thing that I have to do every single day when I wake up is that I have to think to myself, what message am I going to put out there that is going to, like, this work that we do, it's so much bigger than us. It's so much bigger than me and you, Yasmine. It's for our grandchildren's grandchildren, right? It's for the future of the earth that we do what we do, right? And it takes an immense amount of energy just to do that. And then when you have to deal with the frustration and anxiety and pain of the fact that there are people on the internet making up lies to try to get your family executed in Iran, how do you do that? How do you wake up and have to deal with that anxiety and still go out there and put those messages in the world? People, that's what people don't see. They see my messages, they see my little intellectual prose, they see my little, oh, freedom fighting, but you don't know what I had to do this morning to get to that point because of the most immoral people on the planet that do this to you. And that's the type of thing that's just like, it's so hard to like forgive that. It's so hard to forgive that. It's so hard to assume, oh, maybe they mean well. They don't mean well. They don't mean well. And that's the anger that I have to live with every day.
No, I completely understand that, but I don't even have the same level, because the lies that they make up about me are just about me, but they're not
Exactly.
putting like, there's no family members that are being put in danger because of my work. I mean, my family cut me off, 20 years ago. But if they were, I don't even know, if I would be able to continue, especially in Iran, where, at the drop of a hat, they can throw people in prison, or they can execute people, or whatever. It's just so
And
barbaric.
that's what I have to wake up with every day, like knowing what I do, knowing that if they're exposed, knowing if, these connections are made, it's like waking up with that anxiety every single day. I don't think anyone will understand what that's like, It's like to the point where I just don't communicate with my family because I can't deal with the anxiety of if I don't get a response.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, you must know Masih Alinejad. They tried so hard to get to her, and when they couldn't get to her, they arrested her brother. I mean, they'll
Yes,
literally, they don't even care.
that's
Um,
exactly what they do. This is not like, and it's not, and that's the other layer to it, right? It's not just, okay, we're fighting this fight that takes everything out of us. Okay, we're worried about our family, and then there's the next layer of being like at risk here, right? That's
yeah,
exactly what they
yeah,
do to dissidents here. They came after Masih Alinejad. They come after everyone. The news anchors for Iran International, which is the biggest kind of like Iranian diaspora media outlet, they threatened assassination so many times, and they actually stabbed the news anchor 2 weeks ago. They stabbed him and tried to kill him. Like there's so many layers of threats that we have to deal with. And okay, we get it that the regime is going to do this to us, but when these useful idiots online thinking that they're so clever with their stupid, baseless rumors that do nothing except put everybody at risk, those are the people that get me. Do you know what I mean? Like, of course the regime's going
absolutely.
to do that. Of course
Yeah,
the regime's going to do that. But these
you expect it.
irresponsible people, they have no excuse.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree. Now, Elica Le Bon is obviously a pseudonym, and your family is safe, right?
Hard to
As
say.
far as we know.
Hard to say.
Um, so speaking of these useless idiots that you mentioned, you and I speak very similarly in frustration. They're sometimes called useful idiots, but sometimes I feel like calling them useless idiots. It just feels better.
They
Um,
are.
you know, they are what prompted me to write my book. So, you know, it was that whole interaction between Sam Harris and Ben Affleck, where Ben Affleck started calling Sam Harris gross and racist and all that stuff. Yeah, that was what I was like, this is it. I have to speak out. I have to write my book. And I hear your frustration watching your videos, hearing your voice. It's like this weird therapy for me because you articulate so clearly the anger and frustration and annoyance that I feel, and that we've both been feeling for a very long time, I'm sure. And it's just, you know, like, what is it? What is it that we can say to them? You know, what do you think that we can, what do we want them to
So
know or understand? What can you say? What can you say to them to get through to them? What are they getting wrong here in the West?
I think that the deprogramming phase is the first phase. You can't teach them until you've deprogrammed them. That Ben Affleck thing triggered a level of like violence in me that I just
Yeah,
was just like, I hate you so much because
yeah,
for you, this is an opportunity to virtue signal and prove how virtuous you are by, you know, being so angry and defensive over this, you know, Islamophobia. You have no idea the things that you're doing and saying that are literally facilitating the slaughter of people in these countries because you want to look good from the safety of your privilege in the West. Like that it's that moral narcissism that I always talk about, right?
yeah, yeah,
Your concern is how you come off, and coming off as this kind of virtuous person that's so down for the cause. But what you're saying is literally suppressing, like, people like Sam Harris are the very few people in the world that are brave enough to actually tell it like it is. Like, there are so many millions of Muslims and non-Muslims who, whether they come out and say it or not, whether they have access to him or not, rely on this man as literally an icon for having the guts to deconstruct this theory of Islamophobia, right? Because it actually doesn't make any sense. Yes, you can have bigotry towards people who are Muslim. Yes, you can have bigotry towards Arabs, Iranians, all of that stuff, but you can't have a phobia of an ideology. You can't have a phobia of Christianity, right? And when Sam Harris, like that is designed to afford immunity to that ideology so that it can operate to its most extreme extent. And when anybody tries to criticize it, you pull in that word, which is what I call an embargo word, right? Because it shuts down all discourse.
mm-hmm.
You pull in that word, Islamophobia, when you're talking about people being lynched, to shut down the conversation. And when you do that, you are facilitating another person being lynched just for the sake of you being able to appear virtuous. That is the dystopia, the juxtaposition of the reality that we have to face. And that is why I get so angry, because it's nothing to them, but it's murder to our
Yeah,
people. So, getting through to them, and the reason that this is so hard is because so much of what they do is motivated from a place of ego, from a desire to virtue signal, which is something in our society that we've constructed, that it's something that it gets you a lot of brownie points. It's something
mm-hmm.
that makes you appear like a good person. Like, that is the modern day version of appearing like a good person, right? It's virtue signaling for every different community. And so it's very hard to get through to people when their motivations are ego-based. Because even if you come at them with logic and explanation and compassion and understanding, and hey, you're siding with the oppressor, and this is what you need to understand, you can't cut through an ego that's more concerned with appearing virtuous than it is offering truth. And that's the difficulty that we face. It's not just education. I wish it was just education. It's a deconstruction of a society that has made it a good look to do these things. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Absolutely. You know, it's kind of weird because I almost see a renaissance happening in the Middle East, and what's happening here is the exact opposite. Like they seem to be moving in two different directions when it comes to, you know, free thought and enlightenment and values and things like that. It's quite shocking. I mean, even if you just consider what's happening in Iran today, you know, and then what's happening on American universities today. Like it's a polar opposite. You know, it's completely, it's really depressing, but it's also quite perplexing as well. Do you think that we have reached a point possibly where the tides could turn? Do you think that this has all reached a crescendo, you know, them screaming about burn Tel Aviv to the ground, you know, supporting Hamas, supporting Houthis, supporting the Islamic regime of Iran? Do you think that we've now reached a point where as a society, well, or as Western societies, we're going to start to think like, okay, we have to deal with this moral narcissism that you're speaking about? I love all of these terms you come up with, like calling Islamophobia that embargo term. That's exactly what it does. It shuts down the conversation. I don't know if it was started by the Iranian regime specifically or the Muslim Brotherhood or whatever, but it was Islamists anyway who came up with this term. And that was exactly the purpose of the term, was to shut down any criticism of this religion so that they could continue doing what they want to do unfettered. So do you see any hope? Is there any hope for us, or how do you see things going?
Yeah, I do. I do see hope. And that's funny, given the time that we're in, that I see hope. And I'll tell you why. Right now, what's happening in the West is that the West is doing what it has always done, which is deciding the narrative of foreign countries. It's deciding the narrative of the Middle East, even though they're completely the most clueless people in the world doing this. Complete lack of education, complete lack of familiarity, complete lack of experience, complete lack of academia, just nothing. Deciding what the narrative is, which is that all brown people love terrorism. Obviously, we've heard these terms, the bigotry of low expectations. And so people like us and the type of voices that I follow on Instagram and Twitter, like Yemenis, Palestinians, Iranians, Syrians, Lebanese, who all come out and condemn the regime and its proxies. We're considered, right? We're paid for by Mossad, of course. You know, we work directly for the Israeli government, where AIPAC is paying us, because it's unfathomable to us. It's unfathomable to them that Middle Eastern people, the savages that we are, could not love terrorism. Because that's our culture, of course, right? That's our culture. And striving for civility, why would you strive for civility? That's for white people. Civilized people are white people. You stick to your oppression and your terrorism. That's what you're good for, right? So our voices, and it's so funny because I get this every single time that I say things on Instagram, on Twitter, or whatever, right? They'll be like, you don't speak for Iranian people. Iranian people don't agree with you. Middle Eastern people don't agree with you, as if they know, right? As if they know. Like, who do you speak for? Who do you speak for, Dave? You know, they don't understand that the majority of people in the Middle East, of course they oppose terrorism. They don't have the free speech to come back and tell you that, right?
And they're the first victims of that terrorism. Yes, it hits the shores of the West every now and then, but not nearly as much blood that's spilling in the Middle East and North Africa all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. And do you think that these people who are being slaughtered under fundamentalist rule are coming on like, hey guys, oh my God, so today, like, of course not. They don't have that privilege that you have to get on in front of your camera and say, let me tell you who the Houthis are. You don't know who the Houthis are, right? And that's why I amplify these like Yemeni voices, Syrian voices, Palestinian voices, all the voices that are saying these things that they know, right? But in terms of, do I think that there will be a turnaround, a renaissance of sorts? Yes, and I'll tell you why. Even though right now, you and I are the minority hated voices amongst the West, right? Which honestly, it's even astounding that we even broke through. Like the fact that you and I even broke through to this small degree. No, we don't have millions of followers, whatever. The fact that there's even people willing to listen to us in this climate, I don't know. I don't know how that happened. But somebody said something to me once, which was so poignant, and it really kind of is the catalyst of why I have this thought. She said, in an ocean of lies, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, that even the masses will go along with and being like, okay, maybe. She said it takes one person to come out with one single truth that bowls everybody over, and in instant recognition of that truth, right? That's it. And so while we may be small right now, while we may be unheard right now, it's those little sparks of truth that burst into the mass disinformation that slowly over time reveal what that is versus what this is. And yes, they have their millions of followers and millions of views and millions of this, and they've taken over the entire stage, but slowly, the truth always bubbles to the top. And it's because of people like you and I and all of those other voices, the Iranians, Palestinians, Syrians, Israelis, all of them doing the hard work to correct the narrative, that over time, we will see that truth come back, because it always does.
Beautiful. I love it. We're that little girl that's saying the emperor's wearing no clothes, basically, and then just wait for the, yeah. And what about Iran? What is your hope for the future of Iran?
So Iran is a place where people have so many different ideologies and beliefs and aspirations for what the future Iran will look like. So I do my best to stay away from that conversation, because I know that that's where my advocacy ends. My advocacy ends at freeing Iran, obviously, together with everyone that's part of this movement. And then once Iran is free, it's going to be incumbent of the people of the nation, right, who have the right to vote in a free and democratic Iran, who have the right to referendum, to elect for themselves a system that works for them, whether it's a constitutional monarchy, which some of the polls are showing that that's quite a favored direction, or something else. So I can't say exactly what I hope for it, because I don't think that I have a specific.
I mean, that's exactly it. You hope that this Islamic regime falls and that people get to live in a democratic nation where they get to choose for themselves who their leadership is going to be. Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly where I stand on the issue as well. But it's different for me because I'm not even Iranian. So I don't feel like I have any right to even, I don't know enough about the nuances of the country or anything, but it wouldn't be my place to put my 2 cents anyway. But I completely agree with what you've said so far, insofar as we want the regime to fall and we want people to be free to decide for themselves.
Well, I think you could definitely give your 2 cents, and I'll tell you why. A big part of why the regime needs to fall is not just because of their domestic terrorism against our people, it's the regional terrorism that they foment and fund through their proxies. They have caused so much regional instability in Iran, in Syria, in Gaza, in Israel, in Lebanon, in Iraq, right? Once the regime is gone, that changes the entire landscape of all of those neighboring countries, right? And that affects you and your history as a Gazan Egyptian, right? You have an investment in your own future, your own people, your own country's future. And that is going to look very different once the regime is gone, once the regime stops funding the things that are making that impossible. So the answer is to my vision for a future-free Iran is that, yes, once the monsters are gone, we get the monsters out, but it's so much more than that, because we have always been such a powerful people and such a powerful nation. And I see a future-free Iran with these incredible leaders that are not just creating enemy states with everyone in the region, the opposite. They are the bridge builders of the region. They are the people that are hosting the Israeli and Palestinian leaders to talk about peace talks. How can we help? How can we facilitate this? How can we build alliances between us? That's why a future-free Iran changes everything. And once it changes the Middle East, it changes the entire world.
Completely agree. And I feel like all these Iran started this. Iran started this, and then it was a domino effect all over the Middle East and North Africa, and Iran will end this. When Iran falls, all of those dominoes will fall as well. I completely agree with you.
Yes. Once the Islamic Republic falls, it's a domino effect. And even so far as changing the responses in the West, right? Because now the West doesn't have to create policies in response to the Islamic Republic anymore. And so the dynamic is changing globally. And that's why we say the new earth will come out of the women of Iran. It will come out of Iran, because this is it. This is the thing that changes everything, like you said, like the domino effect.
Beautiful. Awesome. So I'm going to open it up to the group now, Elica. We've got a bunch of people that have got their hands raised that have questions for you. Mars, I think you were the first one. Go ahead.
Yasmine, thank you as always. Elica, I'm sorry, did I pronounce her name correctly?
Elica.
Elica, thank you. I follow you on Twitter. I've been enjoying many of your posts, so thank you for your bravery and for putting everything you have out there. The question I have for you is, well, I'm pessimistic. I fully admit that. And there are occasional happenstances that give me some grounds for hope, but I wanted to hear from the resident expert, one of the experts in the room, about like what they think is what we think is offering the groundswell for hope in the future. I wanted to ask your impression, based on what you spoke earlier. I wanted to ask your impression of what do you think the effect the Abraham Accords are having in the overall Middle East itself? Because as you and Yasmine were just speaking of, there seems to be some kind of renaissance happening in the Middle East. Some of the relations between some of the countries, to some degree, are being normalized, and I've heard it being described to me as the Abraham Accords are not simply as a peace treaty between nations, but it's between peoples. Are those having any kind of noticeable and lasting effect in the Middle East? Because if I'm not much mistaken, the attacks of October 7th were precipitated by Iran in order to disrupt a movement along those accords. I wanted to ask your impression as to, do you believe that's the case, and do you believe these accords are a conduit towards moving towards the future that we would all like to see?
Yes. So the background to the story of Hamas, which is that they were an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, and kind of like the love child of the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic Republic, which the Islamic Republic's main goal has always been to end Israel. It's been to destroy Israel. And it's not a secret. The Ayatollah has made multiple speeches that say, we are here to destroy Israel. It's our life's mission. And so they created and funded this proxy and trained them in order to facilitate that end. And that's what is very frustrating when the Western world doesn't understand this, because they say, oh, Hamas just wants a two-state solution. The opposite. Hamas came into existence to prevent a two-state solution from happening. October 7th was not a defensive act for a two-state solution. It was an offensive act against a two-state solution. That is what the Islamic Republic created them for. Okay, so when people say, oh, resistance and freedom fighters, no, destruction. They want to end the state of Israel, and everybody knows that's not possible. The decolonized crowd know that that's not possible. Nobody in their right mind thinks that, okay, if we just do a couple of bit more rounds of terrorism, maybe Israel's going to pack up and leave, right? Not going to happen. The only choice we have is peace and reconciliation. So in answer to your question, I mean, yes, Hamas is there to disrupt all of that. And do I think any of these types of peace accords and treaties are possible while terrorists still have de facto control over territories? No, it's not possible. With them out of the way, yes, I do believe that it's possible, like you said, treaties or peace between peoples rather than nations. But at the same time, there needs to be leaders on all sides who are going to facilitate that. You know, I don't think people have a lot of faith in like Netanyahu to facilitate a meaningful two-state solution either. So it's going to take a lot of changes in leadership, like I said, even from Iran. Taking down the Islamic Republic, introducing new leadership. And I think that's going to be the thing that kind of facilitates that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Elica. Sarah, you're next.
Okay, first of all, Elica, I love you so much. I love you.
Thank you.
Oh my God. Okay. A little starstruck. Okay.
Oh.
You really have helped me and so many people like not get into a pit of despair or pull us out of a pit of despair, especially over the last 6 months. I really want to thank you. I want to ask you 2 questions and we'll see if you have time to answer them. But the first one is about like diaspora politics, because I'm a diaspora Jews, but there are many diaspora from the Middle East too, who, you know, the education system is impacting the way they see things, very left-wing and very, stuff that is, you know, probably very different from their parents' generation. And I want to ask you if you have an opinion about building solidarity or however language you want to use it, but building relationships that come out of a place of love. I know a lot of people from my community are building solidarity, but it sometimes feels like it's from a very negative place towards their own community and towards Israel. Like, and I want to know how can we be fostering better relationships based on love? So that's my first question. My second question is about, you do amazing explanations and analysis about what's going on. And I want to ask you about making sense of reality. There's a lot of like, someone I know calls it like information hedging, when there's just like a lot of information coming and you're like trying to organize it. And there's a lot of, you know, information we don't want to take in also, because
Sarah, can I interrupt you for just 1 second, and we'll get Elica to answer the first question, because I feel like she's probably going to forget it by the time you get to your second question.
Yeah, sure.
So let's just do one at a time.
Sure.
So the thing that you talk about in the diaspora, which is that, you know, you have a lot of people that are raised here and they were kind of indoctrinated by this left-wing academia, politics, this kind of thing. It happened to me too. It happened to me too. I think it happened to a lot of us. And I think the thing that snapped us out of it is that we probably all kind of had an individual wake-up call at a different time. So when I was part of the cult, which is what I call it, I think deep down, I always knew that there was a part of me that questioned how much I really believed what I was saying. And there's such a shift from the things that I do now, the things that I say now, which I feel in my body. I can just feel emanating out of me just absolute truth, unquestionable, unequivocal, absolute truth. Even if everybody hates it, I know it's true. And I think when I was part of that experience, it's not that I didn't believe like what I was saying, because I knew that I believed in the values of the things that I was standing for, but I could see that it had developed into such an orthodox way of having to kind of adhere to these narratives that just felt very rigid, which was something where it was like, I do align with these values, but I don't know if I align with the rigidity of having to accept this very singular narrative about how everything has to be. And if you don't accept it, you've got to go. That's where I started to draw the line. And I think the thing for me that really tipped me off, that it was a series of things, but during the Women Life Freedom movement, when Biden came out with this deal to give $7 billion to the regime to pay ransom for this hostage deal, and Iranians came out in droves on Twitter to be like, don't do this. And you had people like Senator Chris Murphy, who's a Democrat, right? With releasing all these propaganda tweets, all these propaganda videos, like, no, this is the right thing. It's all about diplomacy with the Islamic Republic. And of course, October 7th happened and they all reneged and froze the money and we told you so. But that was the first kind of cracks that I saw where I was like, wait a minute, you are a liar. You claim to stand with the people and minorities, and that's what your whole thing is about. You're literally shitting on us. You see us in our thousands telling you to stop, and you're overriding the Iranian people to enforce your own narrative. You are a liar, and your whole movement is a fucking lie. Sorry, I don't know if I can curse. You can take that out if I
Yes,
can't.
you can. You can fucking curse all you want.
Oh, great. So then that's when the cracks started happening, when I realized that the Democrats were really pushing this kind of alliance and diplomacy with a terrorist regime. I was like, you are not for us, you're a liar. And then when October 7th happened, I think that was my breaking point, because that happened off of the heels of Woman Life Freedom, where we've been explaining to everybody what these regimes are about and what they do. And everyone came out and said, you know, they were cutting their hair and blah, blah, blah. And then October 7th happened. And I was like, okay, the world's now going to see it. They're going to be like, okay, we get it now. We get the whole terrorism thing. No. All of a sudden, every left-wing account, oh, they're freedom fighters, they're resistance, this. That was the biggest red pill moment for me, that this is just a deeply out of touch, propagandized lie. So to answer your question, how do you wake somebody out of being brainwashed? That's essentially your question. How do you wake these people up from their brainwashing? And that's a very, very difficult question. The only thing I can say that what happened for me was that a series of rude awakenings. And I think when you're talking about people who are unaffected, it's very hard for them to have these rude awakenings, because nothing's ever going to be that personal to them to wake them up. So what I will say is, the only thing I can see in response to that is just daily, slowly depriming, deprogramming, putting those bursts of truth out, so that even though people hate it and they don't really like what you're saying, they're slowly taking it in, and it's in the back of their head. And over time, they become de-radicalized and deprogrammed. That's when the education can begin.
Thank you so much. Can I still ask my second question? Or is it
Sure, go
too
ahead.
much? Okay. I wanted to ask,
Just because you're such a huge fan, I can't stop you. I mean, you're like giddy with excitement that you finally get to speak with Elica. Far be it from me to be the one to ruin that.
Thank you, and sorry.
No
So,
worries.
about making sense of reality. So, like a lot of us are like consuming a lot more information than we're used to. Some people are like eating any information they get, no matter how legitimate it is. And I want to ask you about like taking in unpleasant information that maybe counters the things we're used to, but also sticking to what reality is.
Yeah.
Does that question make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, so we're living in an age where people with zero qualifications on anything have 20 million followers and literally just say anything, and their videos go viral with hundreds of thousands of likes and millions of views, and people are like, oh, this is the truth because some random person on TikTok said it, right? And so we are living in an age where we have yet to see the downstream effects of this generation being educated by TikTok. And I'm genuinely terrified for the world that we're going to be stepping into because of this. At the same time, like one thing that happened not long ago was that Bassem Youssef put out this tweet on Twitter, obviously a tweet on Twitter, and he had said something in the vein that framed the Islamic Republic as the victims in the story, in the sense of like they have the right to defend themselves story. And I was fuming. So many of us were fuming. And we asked him to take it down. We asked him to correct the narrative. He has 12 million followers. And soon thereafter, what happened? Everybody started coming out saying Iran has the right to defend itself. Iran is going to free Walter Melonia. Iran is the axis of resistance, blah, 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 right? I made a video. Thankfully, it went viral. Corrected the narrative amongst some people who were willing to listen. So there is that, that's the, again, it's just like a flicker. It's just like a flicker. What they have is the entire world stage. What they have is the entire world's attention. But we do have those flickers of truth that burst through every now and then. And when they hit and when they reach, people are now a little bit, not entirely, just a little bit less confident about coming out there with those narratives. I'm not seeing as much people now coming out with the whole Iran has the right to defend itself, because they've seen the backlash from the Iranian community. So yes, it's bad. Yes, it's huge. Yes, it's center stage. But these small flickers, that's why I have the counter influence in my bio, essentially.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, don't just rely on Elica to create the flickers. Like we can all create flickers in our own lives. You don't have to make a viral video on Instagram, but just the conversations that you have with your friends over lunch or your coworkers or whatever, or even just posting somewhere on social media. We all have to just, be a little bit more brave and be a little bit more honest to counter all of these lies and to counter these narratives. When you were talking about Bassem Youssef, what happened after that tweet was he just got invited everywhere. Suddenly, all of these huge platforms were inviting him and giving him the microphone to spew his ignorance on a larger stage. So a lot of these things, whether it be TikTok or Piers Morgan or whoever, like all of these media entirely, they're after the clicks, they're after the views, they're not after the truth, right? And so just because something is really popular out there, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the truth. So we have to, I love what you were saying, Alec, about flickers, because that's a really great way of describing it. And then just almost like just like dropping these little flickers in the ocean, you know what I mean? Like little drops here and there, but every single drop is going to have a ripple effect. Yeah. Every single seed you drop can grow into an oak tree or whatever. So like, just keep doing that. All of you.
And I would add to that something that I really wish people would really take on board. I don't know how to express this enough, that I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
This is not fun for me. I do not enjoy this. I do this because I have to. And when that whole thing came out, Iran has the right to defend itself, I didn't say anything for like 2 or 3 days, because I was like, please God, somebody else do it. Somebody else correct this. Somebody else do it. And they were. It's not like they weren't doing it, but it was just like small, like flickers everywhere. And it wasn't enough to override the narrative. And I remember having a conversation with someone, and I just started saying everything that I was so angry about. And he was like, put that in a video, explain it that way, and I promise you it will go viral. And thankfully it did, right? But then at the same time, it was like, it was bittersweet, because it was like, really, like, really, if I don't say it, it won't be heard. Like, I don't want to do this, you know, I want other people to do it so I don't have to. I want to like wake up every day and see my feed with people who have millions of followers saying this message going viral, and I just want to lie down on my sofa and watch junk TV. This is not fun for us, you know?
Yeah. That's why I said you're compelled to do it, because I feel the same way, that I'm compelled to do it but the more people that speak up, the more people that say the things that we want people to be saying, then the less work there will be for you in the future. But for you right now, you gotta keep on trucking. Just drink the coffee or the vodka or whatever gets you going. But you're needed, Elica. I'm sorry.
Do the drugs, do whatever you need to do. Yeah,
Robert,
no,
you're next.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Sorry to cut you off. Did you want to say something before we go to Robert?
No, what I
Okay.
was just going to say is that we've got to probably do some, I mean, this is what we're doing. Like, we educate, and then people take on the education and continue it. But it would be good if there was some kind of like stage where you can just like mass educate people all at once, and then everyone goes out, and yeah, it kind of is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, Robert. Yeah.
Okay. Elica, do you think the Islamic Republic can fall alongside Islam, or is it necessary to adopt a more secular society, or at least maybe a westernized version, if that's possible? It seems the Arab Spring or Jasmine Revolution failed in this regard by replacing their dictatorship with another dictatorship almost across the board.
So the revolution in Iran is a grassroots revolution. It isn't a revolution that has external influence. That's kind of like that narrative is the Islamic Republic's propaganda, that this is like a Western-driven revolution. It's grassroots, it's on the ground. What people replace the Islamic Republic with is going to be from the ground. It's going to be from Iranians. We call Evin Prison, Evin University, because it has all of the brightest minds in there. Those are the people that are going to lead the future free Iran. So no, I don't anticipate there being some kind of Western government or, you know, one dictator replacing another dictator, because the simple reality is that these people are not going to have risked their lives and been slaughtered en masse for 45 years just to replace one dictator with another. There's going to be a lot of very tight kind of constrictions around who the next government is going to be. So I don't fear that. I don't anticipate that. And when people kind of also introduce this kind of Western ideology that you might see online a lot, like, oh, this is going to be a Western thing. The reason that they say that is because they associate democracy and civility with the West, when the reality is didn't come from there. The Middle East is the cradle of civilization. The West learnt from that. So when we talk about having this like civilized, democratic, secular society, we aren't becoming Western. We're going back to our origins, right? That was overtaken by fundamentalism and Islamism, things that are not from our origins. These are recent phenomenons over the last couple hundred years, right? It's not where we're talking about nations that are thousands of years old, you know? So what I see is that, yes, the Islamic Republic will fall because it has to. Every oppressive dictatorship falls in the end. And what I see it being replaced by, no, nothing Western, grassroots, people on the ground, the intellects, the revolutionaries on the ground forming a coalition, a government, which remains to be seen.
Thank you.
And if I could add to that, So if you compare what happened in Iraq, because let's just take them as the example. They got rid of Saddam Hussein for the Iraqi people. It wasn't grassroots the way it is in Iran, right? It wasn't the people that rose up to get rid of their dictator and wanted to have a free society. So because it was something that was almost I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, but it wasn't organic.
External. Yeah.
Yes, because it was external. That's why they could get replaced. That's why ISIS could appear in that place, because the people's minds hadn't changed. The people hadn't evolved. Whereas the people of Iran, you could hardly find Muslims there anymore, right? They're completely different. So it's like apples and oranges, really. So I'm with Elica on this. I don't fear that at all. I mean, a whole bunch of things could go wrong, but I do not fear that they're going to end up with another Islamic regime, 100%.
Absolutely not.
That will never happen.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Shannon, you're next.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. I've actually lost track of what my original question was. But I think what I'm wondering—
I can come back to you.
Oh, no, I think I'm okay. I think what I'm wondering is, because you say that these like Western students aren't coming from an academic, like there's nothing academic about it. And while I agree with that, I'm also a graduate student in a gender and women's studies program. And so in many ways, I feel like I'm surrounded by the enemy at all times. Like you can't have a counter narrative in that environment. And it's coming from your professors. And there's such a push in the social sciences for things to be narrative based rather than sort of like objective. Like no one learns the history of Israel and Palestine. All they hear is narratives, and no one wants to hear Israeli or Jewish narratives. So I guess what I'm wondering, because I just, you speak about the parallels that happened in Iran during the revolution, and it's really what I see happening now. So I'm just wondering how you think this could possibly play out differently. Like, is there any hope for Western academia? How do you see this playing out in the West with what we're seeing now in the streets?
Well, first I will say, when I say it's non-academic, I mean it's not actual academia. It's pseudo-intellectual drivel, which is what I call it. It's literally rooted in nothing. Like every single one of their theories that I've heard is completely, completely bogus, right? Like they'll say things like, they'll say things like, you can compare this resistance movement to previously to slaves uprising against their slave owners. In what capacity is a child in a different country a slave owner that you're rising up against, right? In what capacity are Hamas with their billionaire leaders slaves, right? Every single thing that they say is just drivel. It's just false equivalencies. It's completely baseless. It's completely based on just an absolute and utter lack of understanding, right? It's such a superficial intellectual processing. If anybody knew anything about Hamas, they would know why they exist. They would know why they exist, which is not to resist the occupation or to fight for freedom. It is for fundamentalist Islamist imperialism over the entire land for the purpose of maximalism and with the desire to sacrifice every Palestinian and Israeli life to get there. And so the things that they come up with in academia, yes, it's in academia technically, but it's just drivel. It's pseudo-intellectual drivel. So what was the rest of the question again? I just got heated about that once again.
I think just sort of like, do you have any hope for academia and for the West?
Oh, okay. So then that was the other part I was going to say with it. Now this is the perfect storm, right? You have a history of, not a history, a current of so many millions being pummeled into these Western academic student institutions by the Islamic Republic, by Qatar, you know, kind of paying for these Middle Eastern institute quarters of this and that academic institution. And so you couple that influence, which is driving this narrative of like, hey, we're just oppressed people that are fighting Western imperialism, right? You're talking about, you know, the Ayatollahs that have like $200 billion net worth being oppressed by Western imperialism, which, by the way, nobody can name one instance of Western imperialism in Iran for the past 45 years because it doesn't exist. Literally just a big fat lie, right? So they're pummeling that narrative into Western academic institutions. And at the same time, what's happening in those Western academic institutions is that you have people who have been primed to have all of this guilt, this Western guilt, this white guilt, because I'm such a bad person for being white, I'm such a bad person for having privilege, that it creates this perfect storm of like, and I call it guilt laundering. It creates this perfect storm where they get to launder their guilt through the Middle East by saying, I stand with these insane ideologies. I stand with this resistance, right? So they're laundering their guilt. I don't have to feel bad for being white and privileged because I'm aligning with brown people, and they're being fed that narrative actually by these countries in the Middle East. And so you've created a cocktail of the worst case scenario. Do I see hope coming out of the academic institutions? I think like everything else, it's a phase. I think society goes through phases and pendulum swings of what's popular and what's cool. And I think right now this social justice that has devolved into just a farce, right? A complete farce, is absolutely reaching its point where it's going to be on the way out. It's sad because we once relied on that. We once relied on these social justice movements for actual meaningful change. They've been hijacked and destroyed. The people that were relying on these movements are the ones that are affected and have lost the most because of that hijacking. But yeah, I do think that it's on the way out because this trend is dying out.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, we unfortunately are running out of time. We're not going to be able to get to everyone. So if you could just write your questions in the chat, and I'll choose a couple to end it. So Eric, you can go next, and then I'll choose one more person, and then we're going to have to let Elica go.
Hi, Elica. Thanks for joining us. I just want to say I'm a very big fan of your content and sort of all the things you put out over the past few months. My question was, how do you reconcile liberal values with sort of illiberal members of the Western left? And on a similar note, how would you approach the next election when we have to choose between Trump and Biden, who, as you've said, has empowered Iran, or the Islamic Republic, to be more specific?
Sorry, what was the last part? How do you choose between Trump and Biden when what?
How would you approach the next election when we need to choose between Trump and Biden, who, as you've said, has empowered sort of the Islamic Republic?
Empowered, yeah. So this has been the really difficult reality that many Iranians who have typically been Iranian Americans that have typically been Democrat their whole lives have had to kind of wrestle with, because they know that well, they feel, I can't say this is just what they feel that the Democratic Party is beneficial to the country that they live in, but harmful to the country that they're from. And that's a very, very difficult thing to have to reconcile with. So it's very difficult to answer that question, because what I know is that what's come out of this situation is that so many of us, including myself, have become kind of politically homeless, right? Because there's this counterbalance where something feels destructive here and helpful there, and vice versa. So I honestly don't know how to answer that question. I haven't been able to answer that question myself. I think that what a lot of people, the sense that I get from a lot of people about Trump is that they feel that he's very unpredictable. And so people take that one of two ways. Some people, like my friend who lives in Saudi, he says to me that the fact that he's so unpredictable has actually been a very good thing, because people are scared because they don't know what he's going to do. Because he's like, you never know what he's going to do. So they're like, okay, let's not just do anything crazy. But then you have other people who say that his unpredictability is actually something that they're afraid of, like, because they don't know what he's going to do. They don't know the extent of the impact it's going to have in the aftermath. So I really don't know how to answer that question, because I think what the sense that I get is that people have very mixed feelings about it, and they kind of feel like they're in a catch-22.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that, I don't know, I don't really feel like I have a fight anymore after the last few months, definitely. Or like,
Sorry, I think you cut out a little bit. I didn't catch the
Yeah,
last bit.
we couldn't really hear you, Eric, but thank you, Elica. I'm going to end with Daniel, last but not least. Go ahead.
Hi. I actually wanted to ask you about how to keep a mental stability, especially when having anxiety and stress, like we can say like I have, especially after October 7th and the exit, and seeing the reaction of this upside down world, and even seeing some of my idols and content creators saying talking about Palestine and all that nonsense narrative, and after how to keep, sorry, like how can you keep a mental stability
Mhm.
and concentrate on building a successful career and focus on your goals and everything? Because I can tell you that I lost a lot of focus on my stuff when this happened, and I can tell maybe you are on the same boat with everything that happened in Iran, and I had an obsession to get an update from the news and everything, and I believe maybe you are the same about getting updates about what's going to happen with the protest in Iran and everything.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think what's very unique to us and all the people in this chat, and the people that are kind of on the same page with us, is that we have to live through a time where the minority has the truth and the masses have the lie. And it is so crazy making. That's the word that I would use to describe it. It is crazy making to scroll through a timeline of the biggest accounts, the biggest media accounts, the most previously like trustworthy, legitimate people saying the most absolute baseless nonsense that is so harmful to everything, right? We have to have the unique misfortune of having to live through that time. I can tell you that I'm absolutely, absolutely confident that it will turn around, because just again, like I said, truth always has to rise to the top. But right now, we do have to live through this. And what I will say about that is that a silver lining in all of this is that I don't think that I've ever been more resilient. I don't think that I've ever been more resilient than having to deal with this much stress, anxiety, being attacked left, right, and center over just nothing, lies, rumors, fake shit, right? Trying to get this message out there constantly, being overburdened, having to work full time. All of this stuff, it makes you so resilient. So the answer to that is that, okay, first of all, yes, you absolutely need to take care of yourself. Yes, you absolutely need to take mental health breaks. Yes, you absolutely need to check out when you need to. You need to find joy in whatever passions that you have, music, art, whatever it is, painting, right? But on the flip side of it is that while we are going through these tough times, you know, it's that phrase, pain is weakness leaving the body. We are getting stronger every single day. We are getting more and more resilient every single day, just as a byproduct of going through this much resistance by the entire world, right? It is making us more resilient every day. So when you combine that self-care aspect of like taking care of yourself and your mental health alongside the fact that your resiliency is increasing every day, I think that's how at least I can say that I'm able to keep my mental health.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for standing with us, and I really appreciate you taking a stand in this front line of this battle of information and propaganda. We love you.
Thank you so much.
We do love you so much, Elica. I know you probably haven't had a chance to see the comments of everybody telling you how much you're loved and cherished and adored, and everybody's so grateful for you and your work. I know it's difficult for you, and that makes it, you know, even more difficult for me to say, like, keep going, keep doing this. It's you are bringing so much light to this darkness right now. You are being heard. And so, you know, you've been chosen by the universe to do this. So please keep going. And I'm glad that you have the strength to keep going.
And honestly, like the amount of like the amount of that, what you just said, like the amount of love, like waking up and like I can never go through all my DMs, but it's just constant back to back, you know, and that's what keeps me going, because it's not just like some superficial, like, you know, like, oh, I'm like fangirl stuff. It's people that like message me their stories every day. They'll be like, this is what happened to my family, and then this happened, and then this happened, and like the worst things that I've ever heard, and they'll be like, thank you for saying what you say, because this keeps me going. And I'm like, okay, who am I to stop when these are the messages that I'm getting? Do you know what I mean? So It fuels me.
Yeah. No, I totally hear that completely. Is there a final word of advice or you know, did you want to share with us something about some protests maybe that are happening, or some online campaigns for Tumaj? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, or anything, any final words that you have for us?
Sure. There is a protest for Tumaj. I mean, it's happening in different cities all over the world. I think tomorrow in LA, it's going to be at the Federal Building between 3 to 5. You can probably find that information online. We are doing this kind of campaign to say his name, to save his life, where we are, you know, just using the hashtag #FreeTumaj, sharing content about him. We know that the regime doesn't execute people who get a lot of international media attention. So we're trying to kind of do this media storm to get him in the limelight. So that's what I'll say about that. Other than that, I think the last word would just be that we really, really need to rely on each other to keep pushing this forward. We can't, as Yasmine said, we can't just rely on a couple of people to be the ones speaking up. Like, we have to take these messages and we have to put the messages out there, and we have to continue to each take this responsibility to educate, because even though we are a minority in the world right now, what we have that others don't have is truth. And if we take these nuggets of truth, these flickers, as we say, and we each take on that responsibility to keep putting that truth out into the world with our numbers, eventually that's going to grow, and that's going to grow. And then we can rest knowing that we've done what we need to do. And the most important thing to remember, if you ever have a moment where you feel like giving up, or you don't know why you're doing this, or it's pointless, we have to remember that this is bigger than us. It is so much bigger than us. The universe, God, whatever you want to talk about it, has put us here to do this for a reason. We are here to make this change. So if you ever think to yourself, well, what am I going to do? Or this isn't about, you know, like, it's so much bigger than all of us, and every single one of you and every single one of us is being used as a force of this momentum by the universe to spearhead this change that we will realize if we just keep pushing.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you for sharing your time with us today. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. Take care, Elica.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye.
After hearing all that, you might be left wondering, what can I do? How can I help? Well, this is why I created a nonprofit called Free Hearts, Free Minds. We are the only organization dedicated exclusively to helping these free thinkers. We empower them with our programs and supportive community, lifting them up so they can heal, speak out, and begin to make positive changes, not just in their own lives, but within the broader community around them. If this is a cause that resonates with you and you want to make a difference, one way to do that is by donating to Free Hearts, Free Minds. Because not enough people care about this cause, we need people like you to help fuel this change. You can donate via our website, freeheartsfreeminds.com. Thank you. Every dollar you donate makes a difference.